Your history teacher told you August 15th, 1971 was about Nixon fighting inflation. Your economics professor called it a technical adjustment to monetary policy. Both were wrong. On a Sunday evening in 1971, the president stood before television cameras and performed the largest act of financial transformation in human history. He called it temporary. 53 years later, we still live under his temporary measure. This was not crisis management. This was a controlled demolition of the rules governing global money. 15 men engineered the plan at Camp David over 72 hours. Each one was sworn to absolute secrecy. Their families believed they were on a relaxing presidential retreat. In reality, they were rewriting the operating system of global finance behind closed doors with no public debate, no congressional approval, and no warning to allied nations. The official story focuses on inflation numbers and trade deficits. The real story involves who controls the machinery of money creation. Before August 1971, the United States faced constraints. Gold reserves in Fort Knox limited how many dollars Washington printed. Foreign governments held leverage over American spending decisions. The system contained bottlenecks designed to prevent any single nation from dominating global finance. Nixon's decision removed those bottlenecks. It eliminated the last structural limit on dollar creation. It transferred the power to define wealth from a physical commodity to the decisions of central bankers and politicians. The extraction of purchasing power from savers to debtors began in earnest. The gatekeepers of the old system lost their authority overnight. Welcome to Noob Historian. We follow the money, trace the power, and expose the history they never taught you in school. Why does this matter to you in the present day? This single decision explains why your parents bought a house on a single income, while you struggle with two. It explains why the stock market reaches record highs, while your purchasing power declines year after year. It explains why governments accumulate debts measured in trillions with no apparent consequence. It explains why Bitcoin exists. It explains why your savings lose value while you sleep. The system built in August 1971 determines your rent, your wages, your retirement prospects, and your children's economic future. You were never meant to understand how it works. The complexity was the point. The confusion was the feature. Today we open the archives held at the Nixon Presidential Library. We read the internal Treasury memos with handwritten annotations. We examine Arthur Burns's private diary entries expressing his dread. We follow Paul Volcker as working papers from the meetings where America's economic future was decided by a handful of men eating steak dinners at a mountain retreat. Once you understand this decision, you will never see money the same way again. To understand what Nixon destroyed, you must first understand what the world built from the ashes of World War II. In July 1944, delegates from 44 nations gathered at the Mount Washington Hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. Europe lay in ruins. The old financial order had collapsed. The Great Depression had demonstrated the catastrophic consequences of monetary chaos. These delegates came to build something new. The system they created rested on a simple foundation. The United States dollar would be fixed to gold at a rate of $35 per ounce. Every other major currency would be fixed to the dollar at agreed exchange rates. Any foreign government holding dollars earned through trade with America held the right to exchange those dollars for physical gold from U.S. Treasury vaults. This was not a symbolic arrangement. This was an enforceable contract. Foreign central banks sent ships to New York Harbor. They loaded gold bars onto those ships. They sailed home with American gold in their cargo holds. France did this repeatedly throughout the 1960s. So did other nations. The system created discipline. If the United States printed too many dollars, foreign governments would notice. They would exchange their excess dollars for gold. America's gold reserves would shrink. This shrinkage served as an alarm signal. It forced Washington to restrain its spending and money creation. The incentive structure worked. From 1944 to 1971, the United States maintained relatively stable prices. The dollar commanded respect worldwide. American economic dominance rested on trust, and trust rested on gold. But the system contained a fatal flaw. Belgian-American economist Robert Triffin identified it in 1960. His analysis became known as the Triffin dilemma. Here was the problem. The world needed dollars to conduct international trade. The global economy was growing. More trade meant more demand for dollars. The only way to supply more dollars to the world was for America to run trade deficits, spending more abroad than it earned. But running perpetual deficits meant America was sending out more dollars than it had gold to back. Eventually, foreign governments would hold more dollar claims than America held gold in its vaults. At the moment they realized this, they would rush to convert their dollars before the gold ran out. The system would collapse. Triffin predicted the end in 1960. He gave it about a decade. He was right. The numbers tell the story. In 1950, the United States held over 20,000 metric tons of gold in its reserves. By 1960, this had fallen to around 15,000 metric tons. By 1970, reserves had dropped below 10,000 metric tons. The trajectory pointed toward zero. Meanwhile, foreign dollar holdings kept growing. By 1971, foreign governments and central banks held claims on roughly $50 billion. The U.S. gold stock, valued at $35 per ounce, amounted to roughly $10 billion. Foreign claims exceeded American gold by a ratio of 5 to 1. The math had become impossible. The United States faced a choice. It had to either stop running deficits, which would choke off global dollar supply and trigger a depression, or it had to raise the gold price dramatically, which would amount to a massive devaluation and admission of failure, or it had to abandon gold entirely. Presidents Kennedy and Johnson both understood the problem. Both kicked the decision down the road. Both implemented half measures and special arrangements with allied central banks to delay the reckoning. They formed the London Gold Pool to suppress gold prices. They pressured allies not to convert their dollars. They bought time. By August 1971, the time had run out. On Thursday, August 12, 1971, the British ambassador to the United States delivered a message to the Treasury Department. The United Kingdom wished to convert $3 billion into gold. $3 billion represented 1/3 of America's remaining gold stock. If Britain converted, other nations would race to convert before the vault emptied. The entire Bretton Woods system would collapse within days in a chaotic scramble. Treasury Undersecretary Paul Volcker received the message. He immediately contacted Treasury Secretary John Connally. Connally contacted Nixon. Within hours, the president made a decision. He would convene an emergency economic summit at Camp David beginning the next day. The participants would develop a comprehensive response over the weekend. They would announce it Sunday night before Asian markets opened Monday morning. The secrecy was absolute. Nixon ordered participants to tell their families they were attending a routine retreat. No phone calls in or out. No leaks to the press. The future of global money would be decided in isolation. The 15 participants arrived Friday afternoon, August 13th. The group included Nixon, Connally, Volcker, Federal Reserve Chairman Arthur Burns, Office of Management and Budget Director George Shultz, Council of Economic Advisors Chairman Herbert Stein, and 9 others. Each brought briefing books prepared in haste. Treasury staff had worked through the night preparing options papers. The key document was titled International Monetary Crisis, Options for Presidential Action. It outlined 3 paths forward. Option 1 called for defending the existing system. The United States would raise interest rates sharply, cut government spending, and accept a recession to restore foreign confidence in the dollar. This option preserved the gold link, but guaranteed economic pain and political damage. Option 2 proposed negotiating with allied nations for a coordinated realignment of exchange rates. The dollar would be devalued modestly against gold, and European currencies would be revalued upward. This option required foreign cooperation and would take months to arrange. It also required admitting American weakness. Option 3 was labeled the most dramatic and potentially destabilizing approach. The United States would unilaterally suspend gold convertibility, impose wage and price controls to fight inflation, and add a temporary import surcharge to protect American industry. This option required no foreign cooperation. It would shock the world but demonstrate American resolve. The Treasury Department recommended Option 3. John Connally emerged as the dominant voice over the weekend. The Texas Democrat turned Republican Treasury Secretary had no background in international finance. He had no sentimental attachment to the Bretton Woods system or to gold. He viewed the crisis through the lens of American power, not monetary theory. Connally argued the case bluntly. Foreign nations had been taking advantage of American generosity for decades. They enjoyed military protection under the American nuclear umbrella. They exported freely to American consumers. And now they demanded American gold in exchange for the dollars they had accumulated. Connally saw this as extortion. His position was simple. America held the leverage. Foreign nations needed access to American markets more than America needed their approval. The United States should act unilaterally and force the world to adapt. Arthur Burns represented the opposition. The Federal Reserve Chairman was an economist by training and a conservative by temperament. He understood the gold standard's historical role in maintaining monetary discipline. He feared what would happen when politicians gained unlimited power to create money. Burns's personal diary records his state of mind during those meetings. He argued against suspension. He warned of inflation. He predicted the link, once broken, would never be restored. He lost the argument. By Saturday evening, the group had reached consensus. Nixon would announce Option 3 on Sunday night. Volcker's team spent Saturday night drafting the speech. Nixon made handwritten edits Sunday morning. The announcement was scheduled for 9 p.m. Eastern Time. Burns's diary entry from August 16th captures the moment. He wrote, "The president made his decision. I expressed my doubts, but in the end the die is cast. God help us all." On Sunday evening, August 15th, 1971, the major television networks interrupted their regular programming. The Western series Bonanza gave way to a presidential address from the Oval Office. Nixon spoke for 18 minutes. He framed the speech around protecting American workers and American prosperity. He announced a 90-day freeze on all wages and prices. He announced a 10% surcharge on imports. and he announced the suspension of dollar convertibility into gold. The gold announcement received less than 40 seconds of the speech. Nixon described it as a technical measure to defend the dollar against international speculators. He emphasized its temporary nature. He gave no indication the entire post-war monetary order had ended. The next morning, gold markets erupted. The London gold market remained closed for 2 weeks as officials scrambled to establish new trading arrangements. When it reopened, gold prices had already jumped significantly from the official $35 rate. The suppressed price was gone. Foreign exchange markets descended into chaos. European governments did not know what exchange rates to use. Some closed their currency markets entirely. Finance ministers issued statements ranging from confused to furious. French Finance Minister Valéry Giscard d'Estaing condemned the decision as a unilateral American act violating international agreements. His anger had deep roots. Former French President Charles de Gaulle had criticized America's exorbitant privilege since the early 1960s. De Gaulle had systematically converted French dollar holdings into gold, sending ships to collect bullion from New York. France saw itself as the defender of monetary order against American excess. IMF Managing Director Pierre-Paul Schweitzer sent urgent cables to member nations. He wrote, "The United States has taken unilateral action fundamentally altering the international monetary system established at Bretton Woods. The consequences are not yet possible to fully assess." American stock markets told a different story. The Dow Jones Industrial Average surged 33 points on Monday, August 16th, its largest single-day gain in history at the time. Investors cheered the wage price freeze as anti-inflationary. They cheered the import surcharge as protectionist. They largely ignored the gold announcement. The public reaction was similarly muted. Polls showed strong approval for Nixon's economic program. Americans focused on the wage price freeze and the import surcharge. The gold suspension seemed obscure and technical. Most Americans had never tried to exchange dollars for gold. The change affected their daily lives in no obvious way. This would prove to be the greatest trick of the Nixon shock. The transformation was so fundamental and so abstract that ordinary people failed to recognize what had happened. Money had changed its essential nature, but it still looked the same. It still felt the same. It still bought groceries and paid rent. The revolution was invisible. Over the following months, American officials attempted to construct a new international monetary order. In December 1971, finance ministers from the major economies gathered at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington. They agreed to a new set of fixed exchange rates. The dollar was officially devalued against gold from $35 to $38 per ounce. Nixon called it the most significant monetary agreement in the history of the world. The agreement lasted 14 months. By February 1973, the fixed rates had collapsed under speculative pressure. The dollar was devalued again to $42.22 per ounce. By March 1973, major currencies were floating freely against each other. The system of fixed exchange rates was dead. The Jamaica Accords of 1976 made it official. The International Monetary Fund amended its articles to remove gold from the international monetary system entirely. Member nations gained the right to adopt whatever exchange rate arrangements they preferred. The era of commodity-backed money was over. The temporary suspension had become permanent. Nixon's 40 seconds had reshaped the world. The years following 1971 demonstrated what money without anchor becomes. Inflation arrived first. Consumer prices rose 4.4% in 1971. By 1974, inflation hit 11%. By 1980, it peaked at 13.5%. The dollar lost half its purchasing power in a single decade. Savers watched their life savings erode. Workers demanded higher wages to keep pace. A wage price spiral took hold. The Federal Reserve, now freed from gold constraints, responded by printing money. The M2 money supply stood at $685 billion in 1971. By 1980, it had reached $1.6 trillion. The machinery of money creation was running at full speed. Paul Volcker, who had architected the suspension as Treasury Undersecretary, was appointed Federal Reserve Chairman in 1979. He inherited the inflation his earlier work had enabled. He responded with the most aggressive interest rate increases in Fed history, pushing rates above 20%. The resulting recession of 1981-1982 was brutal, but broke the inflation cycle. Volcker later reflected on the 1971 decision in his memoir. He wrote, "I still have in my files some notes from those days. I labeled the document Volcker Group Options Paper. Option 1 was to hunker down. Option 2 was to try some kind of international negotiation. Option 3 was suspension. I favored Option 3, but I never imagined it would become permanent. The man who designed the suspension never intended it to last. But once governments tasted freedom from gold constraints, they would never voluntarily return. The decades following 1971 saw an explosion of debt at every level. The U.S. national debt stood at $398 billion when Nixon made his announcement. It crossed $1 trillion in 1982. It reached $10 trillion by 2008. By 2024, it exceeded $34 trillion. The trajectory shows no sign of reversing. Private debt followed similar patterns. Consumer credit, mortgage debt, corporate borrowing, all expanded enormously. Credit became the engine of economic growth. The financial sector, once a small portion of the economy, grew to dominate it. Asset prices rose in parallel. The stock market, adjusted for inflation, was lower in 1982 than in 1968. Then it began an ascent lasting 4 decades. Housing prices, which had tracked inflation for generations, began rising faster than incomes. Financial assets of all kinds appreciated relentlessly. Those who owned assets before the inflation grew wealthy. Those who depended on wages fell behind. The divergence between asset owners and wage earners became a defining feature of the post-1971 economy. A dollar saved in 1971 is worth roughly 13 cents today in purchasing power terms. A dollar invested in stocks in 1971 is worth over $200 today. The incentive structure now rewards speculation over saving, borrowing over prudence, assets over labor. The infrastructure of modern finance grew from this foundation. Derivatives, securitization, complex financial instruments all require abundant credit to exist. Fixed exchange rates had limited currency speculation. Floating rates made it one of the largest markets in the world. The foreign exchange market now trades over $7 trillion daily. Most of this activity serves no productive purpose. It exists because the post-1971 system makes it profitable. Central banks became the most influential economic institutions. The Federal Reserve, European Central Bank, Bank of Japan, and others now manage economies through interest rate policy and money creation. Their decisions move markets instantly. Their chairmen are studied for every word, every gesture, every implication. No institution held this degree of concentrated economic power before 1971. The system proved resilient in ways its critics did not expect. Predictions of dollar collapse have circulated for 5 decades. Yet the dollar remains the world's reserve currency. Oil trades in dollars. Global debts are denominated in dollars. Central banks hold dollars as their primary reserve asset. The infrastructure built around dollar dominance has proven difficult to replace. This resilience has a cause. After 1971, the United States built a system of dollar dependency through financial networks, military alliances, and economic pressure. Nations attempting to abandon the dollar face serious consequences. The system perpetuates itself. The decision made on August 15, 1971, flows directly into the economic pressures you experience today. Consider housing. In 1971, the median American home cost roughly $25,000. The median household income was approximately $10,000. The ratio stood at 2.5 to 1. A family earning the median income put aside wages for a few years and bought a home. Today, the median home price exceeds $400,000. The median household income stands around $75,000. The ratio now exceeds 5 to 1. The same home requires twice as many years of income to purchase. The difference represents purchasing power extracted through monetary expansion since 1971. Consider wages. In 1971, minimum wage stood at $1.60 per hour. Adjusted for official inflation, it should be roughly $12.50 today. The actual federal minimum wage is $7.25, but this understates the gap. If minimum wage had kept pace with productivity growth rather than inflation, it would exceed $25. Workers today produce more value per hour than ever before. They receive a smaller share of the value they create. Consider savings. A person who saved $10,000 in 1971 and held it in cash would possess purchasing power worth roughly $300 today. The saver followed traditional wisdom. The saver lost 87% of their wealth by doing nothing wrong. The system punishes saving and rewards borrowing. Consider student loans. Total student debt in America exceeds $1.7 trillion. This debt exists because money became cheap and abundant after 1971. Universities raised tuition because students had access to unlimited federal loans. Federal loans expanded because the government faced no constraint on borrowing. The constraint disappeared when gold disappeared. The pattern repeats across every sector. Healthcare costs rise faster than wages. Childcare costs rise faster than wages. Education costs rise faster than wages. The essential expenses of life absorb an ever larger share of household income. This is not accidental. This is the designed function of a system where money creation benefits asset holders while costs flow to wage earners. The philosophical implications have not gone unnoticed. Bitcoin emerged in 2008, explicitly designed as a response to the post-1971 monetary order. Its anonymous creator, known as Satoshi Nakamoto, embedded a message in the Genesis block, The Times, 03 Jan 2009. Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks. The message was a deliberate statement about fiat currency's failures. Bitcoin operates on the opposite principle from post-1971 money. Its supply is fixed. No central authority creates more. No government devalues it through printing. Whether Bitcoin succeeds or fails as money, its existence represents a direct challenge to the system Nixon built. Modern monetary theory, known as M&MT, represents the opposite philosophical response. Its proponents argue governments with sovereign currencies face no inherent spending limits. They argue deficits are not problems to be solved, but tools to be used. They see the post-1971 system as liberating governments from artificial constraints. Critics see MMT as the dangerous endpoint of Nixon's decision, the final abandonment of monetary discipline. Central bank digital currencies represent the next evolution. Over 130 countries, representing 98% of global GDP, now explore CBDCs. These would make money entirely abstract, existing only as entries in government databases. Physical cash would disappear. Every transaction would become traceable. The money Nixon untethered from gold would become untethered from physical form itself. De-dollarization efforts represent foreign nations attempting to escape the system. China, Russia, Brazil, India, and other BRICS nations discuss alternative reserve currencies. They create bilateral trade agreements, settling in local currencies. They build payment systems outside dollar infrastructure. These efforts echo France's criticisms from the 1960s. Nations still resent the exorbitant privilege America gained when Nixon closed the gold window. The Federal Reserve's balance sheet illustrates the system's trajectory. For nearly a century, the Fed's balance sheet remained below $1 trillion. In response to the 2008 financial crisis, it expanded to over $4 trillion. In response to the 2020 pandemic, it reached $9 trillion. Each crisis requires more money creation. Each intervention grows larger than the last. The pattern shows no endpoint. Your economic life unfolds within this architecture. The rent you pay reflects decades of monetary expansion inflating asset prices. The debt you carry reflects a system designed to encourage borrowing. The wages you earn reflect workers' declining share of productivity gains. The savings you accumulate lose value by design. None of this is natural law. None of this is inevitable. All of it traces back to a decision made by 15 men at a mountain retreat over a single weekend. They told no one until it was done. They called it temporary. They never reversed it. Arthur Burns wrote in his diary after the announcement, "God help us all." 53 years later, we live in the world his doubts foresaw. The machinery keeps running. The extraction continues. The flow of value moves upward from those who work to those who own, from those who save to those who borrow, from the future to the present. You now understand how it started. You understand the pressure points, the incentive structures, the concentration of control. You see the system they built and the choices they made. What you do with this knowledge is your decision. The trail is open. The archives are public. The ledger they kept hidden is now in your hands.